Hey, what's up guys? My name is Moda and welcome back to the Mining Stacker YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to talk about the current situation of the market. We're going to look at this current dip, talk about a lot of the news events that have happened just these past couple of days, and how we're going to play the rest of this market, and why realistically kind of should be preparing for the worst regardless of how bullish you are. Okay, so we're going to talk about it. We're going to give our thoughts. We're going to talk about just what I'm personally doing with this market, right? Because reality, things ain't looking too good, right? If that sounds good, guys, stay tuned. Let's get right to this thing. So, going to talk about just overall how I'm going to play this market, what I'm going to do with my personal portfolio. None of this is financial advice. None of this is even saying that this is really good advice. Right? Realistically, I'm literally going to just talk about what I'm going to do with my portfolio, what coins I'm going to do what with, and as to why, right? Just kind of giving the logic behind it. Currently, let's take a quick look at the market. BTC is currently at 85,700. We're kind of looking good this past week, and then things all took a shit yesterday, which was kind of weird. I mean, realistically, we were kind of expecting a lot of volatility into yesterday, right? Today is December 1st for context. Yesterday being a kind of a unique day in that it was the weekly close as well as the monthly close. And it was going to kind of be a big deal just because November being such a big pivotal month, right, in the post-halving year. Okay, so realistically, I was expecting a lot more volatility leading into it, but realistically, it happened right after, which was kind of unique, and why, to me, it kind of just smells more manipulation, okay? So as we look at the days leading up to it, you can see ultimately last week, yes, things were bearish, then we kind of hit in the 90s, and then we kind of just stayed there. You can see pretty much throughout the whole week, and then again, specifically right at the close, which again, when we see stuff like this, it just screams manipulation. Like literally, the close for us on EST, on Eastern Standard Time, it's at 7 p.m. Okay, you can see literally to the minute, that's when things shit the bed, right? So it's kind of funny that they waited for the close to happen before they pulled the trigger to kind of dump everything, and it's kind of been in a downtrend since then. Okay, so we're currently at 85.5. It's not the 80,000 wick that we had just a few weeks ago, although we're not too far away. Okay, so when we look at the numbers, when we look at things realistically, I mean, it's not looking good. The fact that we, even prior to the dump, the fact that we're closing in the low 90s wasn't a good look, right? Realistically, we wanted to be above like 94, above 97, kind of heading in that direction with bulls kind of taking charge, and they did it, right? So me personally, though, I wasn't going to put a whole lot of weight into it just because, again, this is a holiday week. A lot of people still on vacay, low volume, low liquidity. So realistically, I'm kind of waiting for like mid-December, right? We're going to have that FOMC meeting on the 10th. That's going to tell us if we get a rate cut or not. That's going to be pretty pivotal in how the trajectory for the rest of the month goes, in my opinion, right? Realistically, yes, the market is somewhat pricing it in. Pretty much all other risk-on assets except for crypto, right? This has been a really big kind of concern, at least for short-term price action, is that things have gone up in other risk-on assets. So things like stocks, precious metals, gold, silver, etc. have done pretty well, even just recently, but not crypto. Okay, so that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Things may eventually go into crypto down the road, but it is something to be aware of, right? And it's something to realistically kind of be prepared for the worst just in case it takes a while. Ultimately, it is going to sound bearish, but I am bullish for us getting some kind of price action. Probably not till 2026. Again, whether it's sometime in January, February, March. Hopefully that's the time frame. I mean, realistically, yes, we know the new Fed chair is going to be sometime in May. The market's going to price it in well before then just because we know whoever Trump puts in, it's going to be somebody who's going to get those rate cuts going. Okay, so that doesn't mean that things aren't going to start until then. The market's going to price that in prior to then. Okay, so for me, chances are that's probably when I'm looking to exit. Realistically, I was looking to exit really at the end of this year, but it's just not looking good, right? We got to be realists. We got to look at the things. Yes, we can be bullish and all this stuff, but we have to look at the data. And that's kind of what it's telling us, is that more than likely, we're not going to be looking good for this month. Okay, so maybe we do get that rate cut. Maybe do things kind of flip. But I still don't think even if we do well, that we're going to do extremely well by the end of this month, meaning potentially peaking, right? Realistically, that's what I'm kind of looking for is potential exit positions, okay? And I don't think it's going to happen in a few weeks, okay? So again, we're always looking at probabilities and the likelihood of things, and to me, it's just not very likely that that's going to happen, right? So sometime in 2026, hopefully those first few months, because the longer it goes, kind of almost riskier things get, right? There's a lot of volatility, a lot of things going on. That's what we'll just talk about next. We're going to kind of go through a lot of these headlines quick. We're not going to go in depth through them. It's just to kind of give you an idea how much shit's going on right now, which it's a ton, okay? So one of the big things was November 28th, and this was just a random comment from Trump, and this is just kind of giving you the mindset, right? So President Trump says he will keep the stock market at all-time highs and calls the market hot with a big boost for 401ks. The S&P rises to levels just 1.3% away from a new record high. Again, this was back on the 28th. This is just kind of like whistling, like dog whistling, essentially saying that they're going to do what they can to keep it up. Again, they can only do so much until we get more rate cuts. That's what's really going to be a more bigger catalyst. We know that quantitative tightening is ending potentially today. That doesn't mean we're immediately going into QE. It's going to probably be a transition phase, whether it's days, weeks, or months, we don't know, but we do know that it is the end of QT, right? So something to be aware of. We also do know that kind of like right before, essentially, they're kind of eventually going to prop up essentially the AI bubble, right? This has been a big concern for all of Wall Street, any investors, just because this, in reality, is what's keeping everything afloat. Okay, it's the Mag 7, it's the majority of everything, and this is just kind of giving Fed backing to it, essentially. Okay, we'll read a quick sentence of it. This is a executive order launching the Genesis mission back on November 24th. Today, America is in a race for global technology dominance and the development of AI, an important frontier of scientific discovery and economic growth. To that end, my administration has taken a number of actions to win that race, including issuing multiple executive orders and implementing America's AI Action Plan, which recognizes the need to invest in AI-enabled science to accelerate scientific advancement. And he continues on and on and on, but that's just kind of giving us the gist of it, that they're essentially going to be backing this, right? They're going to be investing heavily. They're going to make sure they are funded, that they are going. They're going to be easing restrictions. We're going to see more power generation events. We're going to see a lot of different things going into different sectors here, whether it's cutting the red tape for them to add more data centers here in the US. There's going to be a lot of benefits to that, and they're going to make sure that it happens. Okay, so in a sense, it's giving more confidence for people to invest in those things, just because essentially it's going to be backed by the Fed. Okay, they're going to make sure that bubble doesn't burst, because they also know if that bubble bursts, shit's going to be hitting the fan. All right, so that doesn't mean it's guaranteeing things, because anything can happen, right? They can back it, they can do all these things, they can build all these data centers, and yet we can still have some news that can have not so great price action. If you guys remember what happened with DeepSeek, right? So it can even happen from innovation, right? Maybe a new language comes out, new technology comes out, a new breakthrough comes out, where maybe we don't need all the data centers that we thought we needed. Okay, and maybe another country goes ahead of the race, such as China with DeepSeek, if you guys remember that, and what effect it had on the market, right? Specifically NVIDIA, like as irrational as it was, it did kind of devastate the market at that time, right? So who's to say that doesn't happen, especially if it happens at a wrong time when everything's already kind of dwindling because of something else. Like, it can happen still, right? So definitely be aware of that, okay? Let's continue on. There was also a hit piece on David Sachs from the New York Times. Again, you can go through the whole thing and read through it, why a lot of it is just more FUD. And that's the common theme here, is just a lot of FUD articles, things that we kind of tend to see over and over. You can read into it if you'd like. Let's go down. This was another one, more Tether FUD, and this is a tale as old as time. And this came from Arthur Hayes. A 30% drop in Bitcoin could make Tether insolvent, warns Arthur Hayes. He gave his whole little thesis as to why. There was already a response from Paulo. We'll just read it real quick. From the latest attestation announcement, Q325, Tether will continue to maintain a multi-billion-dollar excess reserve buffer and an overall proprietary group equity approaching $30 billion. Tether had at the end of Q3 25 $7 billion in excess equity on top of the $184.5 billion stablecoin reserves, plus another $23 billion in retained earnings as part of our Tether Group equity. Tether Group total assets $215 billion, stablecoin liabilities $184.5. S&P made the same mistake of not considering the additional group equity nor the $500 million in monthly base profits generated by U.S. Treasury yields alone, right? So that is definitely something to factor in. Some influencers are either bad at math or have the incentive to push our competitors, which is partially what's happening there. Forever trusting who we are. No, nothing else matters. Okay, so just some context there. And again, this is another one we've been seeing every like 6 to 8 months, just the whole quantum threat, which realistically, again, if there is a quantum threat to Bitcoin, realistically, before it even happens to Bitcoin, it's going to happen to any kind of infrastructure that's online. So let's say your bank account that's online, like there's a whole lot of other things that are going to get cracked prior to that happening, right? So they are well aware. It's been something they've been working on for a long time. There's a lot of articles, a lot of things going on that kind of tell you why, at least in the short term, it's not necessarily concerned. In the long term, sure, but again, it's something they have been working on constantly. And typically when we see these, we'll see a lot of advertisements for quantum resistant blockchains. We'll see a lot of that kind of stuff. Again, this is something that's every 6 to 8 months, this kind of keeps coming back, just like that Tether FUD. And then currently there's a lot of FUD with MicroStrategy, which again is going to affect Bitcoin. It is going to affect ETFs. It is going to affect people who aren't necessarily super in the know. There's two big things. One, let's see, both of these are out. Let's refresh. One is regarding MicroStrategy admits a Bitcoin sale is possible, which I mean, again, this is a pretty silly article, but again, people see this headline and they like, oh, I told you he's going to sell. And again, this is just part of the thing. Okay, so this is what they're talking about. CEO Feng Li reveals hidden kill switch in MicroStrategy's Bitcoin strategy. Again, just as a reminder, Saylor isn't the CEO of MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy has confirmed a scenario almost no one thought possible, the potential to sell Bitcoin, its core treasury asset. Speaking on what Bitcoin did, CEO Feng Li outlined the precise trigger that would force a Bitcoin sale. First, the company's stock must trade below 1x the MNAV, meaning the market cap falls below the value of its Bitcoin holdings. Second, MicroStrategy must be unable to raise new capital through equity or debt issuance. This would mean capital markets are closed or too expensive to access. Okay, so it's always going to be possible, but again, people just read this and they kind of immediately go like, oh, I told you so, he's going to do it. Was he really? Probably not, right? Most analysts have it predicted maybe in the 2028 bull if things don't go as expected. There could be some concern there, but realistically, that would be the time. Even as far as liquidations go, that's another thing that at like 77,000 he'll get liquidated. That's also not true. Again, as we get closer to that level, you're going to see those articles come up again. Just kind of be aware of this cycle of FUD that tends to happen, which again, it's kind of all leads into this whole manipulation thing, right? Yeah, all this, especially with all this going on, just screams manipulation, right? So something to be aware of. Let's continue down. And this is something that they've been kind of blaming the October 10th thing on. Again, I think it's just something to pile on, and it's something that could be in addition to all the shenanigans that happened on Binance, I suppose. But I wouldn't put the whole October 10th dump on this, right? That kind of doesn't make any sense. Yes, it could have dumped the price action, but we know if you look into Binance and the liquidations and their whole issue with, that's a whole separate thing, right? So realistically, that's what kind of faltered more so than just the price action going down, okay? Let's look at the main thing here. Saylor's comments come after JP Morgan analyst, I'm going to try to pronounce that name, warned that strategy faces potential exclusion from major equity indices, including the NASDAQ 100, MSCI USA, and MSCI World. The analyst noted that approximately $9 billion of Strategy's current $59 billion market cap is likely held in passive investments through ETFs and mutual funds tied to major benchmarks. Okay, so the FUD just came from whether or not they'll be excluded from that index, right? So that can have grave concerns or can affect things definitely. Again, we're supposed to hear an update on this sometime mid-January, January 15th. can exclude them as well as some others, right? So that is something to be aware of. Again, would this be the cause for that whole October 10th dump? I don't think so, right? Let's continue down. So because of this FUD, though, you can definitely see the effect on their stock price. It's currently down 162 bucks. Again, just for reference, back in July it was $434. This is not the trajectory we're expecting for strategy coming into Q4 of 2025, but here we are. All right. Let's continue and just kind of more news on the DATs, right? That's something we've been harping on since the announcement of all these things. To me, it's a pretty big concern, man. Realistically, like we mentioned at the time, it's bullish for going into Q3, Q4 if things kind of really went off, and they kind of didn't. And realistically, this could be a pretty big concern because some of them aren't doing too well because a lot of them, like we've mentioned, kind of started adding their assets during the peak, right? Not during some of the lows, or it hasn't been a long term enough where they were able to get some of the peaks and the valleys, kind of like MicroStrategy, where yes, they have purchased the top quite a few times, but they were also stacking in the bear market. Okay, so Tom Lee's Bitmine acquires 97,000 ETH. This is today, but I think the bigger news here was just how much they're down, right? And it's just in such a small amount of time. Bitmine remained one of the few firms that kept buying. However, the firm is estimated to be sitting on nearly $4 billion in unrealized losses on its ETH stash. And that's in a pretty short term. Okay, and that's if stuff doesn't get worse, which, again, it ain't looking too great, at least in the short term. Okay, so the issue there is then what can potentially happen, right? A lot of people sell their shares. They can cause a lot of issues, right? And we've seen it with some of the other stocks too. Right? You don't hear a lot about it because a lot of people don't want to mention the FUD. When I say the FUD, but let's say the bad news, right? Realistically, this isn't FUD. This is just facts. Okay? Another big one. This is Nakamoto, and this is from David Bailey, right? David Bailey of the Bitcoin conference. There's a reason you don't really hear him talking a whole lot anymore these past few months, and it's because the performance of his stock, right? So they had that merger with Kindly MD. When they took over, you can see the big pump here during that time when it happened, peaking at around $25 on May 27th. This thing is down to 50 freaking cents. Horrible performance, right? Potentially one of the worst so far. Okay, and this has big name backing. He is the CEO. He is running everything. Yet this is where it's at. Okay, so it's even worse than before them doing this Treasury thing, right? Before the merger. Again, they merged with Kali MD, and it's now Naka, right? Which is Nakamoto. So pretty freaking bad. So again, more things to factor in here. The other big news event was with Japan and the yen carry crypto trade trading over. Japan signals rate hike. Japan's 2-year bond yield reached 1% for the first time since 2008, with BOJ Governor Ueda signaling a possible rate hike at the December 18th to 19th policy meeting. Rising yields and yen strength threatened to unwind the decades-old yen carry trade, sparking global deleveraging in equity and crypto markets. And again, this is something we saw last year. Now shit is really hitting the fan, and this is another potential blame for everything going on. Although, again, like we mentioned with Bitcoin's price, the fact that it happened right at the close, these are just times where they seem to like jump on, right? Whenever there's bad news events, that's when, if anything nefarious tends to happen, that is when it does tend to occur. Okay, so just a quick snapshot of everything going through. You can go through and read bigger articles. So now the question is, what do we do? What am I doing? Right? So a couple of trains of thought. Okay, so right now, currently as is, again, you got to be a realist. Things aren't looking good for the short term. Realistically, my mindset is that yes, sometime in 2026, chances are we will eventually have some kind of run for potentially altcoins, right? Have your risk on assets. Hopefully the sooner the better, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it going to like close to Q2, right? It could be right at the time when Jerome Powell gets the boot. Maybe it's around that time. Maybe it's sooner when everybody's pricing it in. Maybe something else happens. Maybe more good news happens. We don't know, right? But that is kind of my thesis, that I still do think sometime in 26 we're still going to run. Just because I kind of refuse to believe that this is how a lot of the altcoins are going to end their cycle for this time, right? I think another thing that is kind of pretty clear is that our expectation was potentially this was going to be the last cycle. It's not even kind of finishing out in play, right? So we can pretty much say that it's definitely not going to peak in December realistically. Could have been the window of any of this time. Realistically, we would have needed to have been at least 100K to have confidence that, okay, maybe we're going to be bullish these next few weeks. Not looking good right now, right? But like we mentioned, it can reverse. Maybe tomorrow it does flip, let's say theoretically. Even then, though, that's just not enough time for things to kind of really flip and recover, especially for the riskier assets. Maybe BTC flips, maybe everything goes into BTC dominance goes up. That is a potential marker there, right? And that is kind of does need to be the expectation, right? Because if BTC doesn't flip, ain't shit else gonna flip, right? So that's why there's always a heavy emphasis on BTC. So now, as far as what to do with the portfolio, right? Do we escalate? Like maybe, because we also have to acknowledge that there's a very good chance that this is over, right? There is definitely the possibility that this was the top back on October 6th, 7th, that it was 124, 125, 126, I think is what it peaked at. There is potential there, right? And I'm at the point where I'm probably like 50% convinced that that potentially was the top, right? So there's definitely a chance, but like we've also mentioned, even if there's only a 20% chance to have a bull market sometime in 2026, I'm going to take that bet all day, right? And realistically, I do see it happening sometime, right? Whether it's a organic pump, it's an organic thing, if it's a crime season thing, is it just exit liquidity? Like, there's a lot of different reasons, but I still do feel like that is going to happen, okay? And even if it doesn't happen, you gotta be kind of prepared for it. So you gotta be prepared for either way, right? So what do you do with the portfolio then? If you think it already happened, so I should just dump everything, not so fast, right? At least for me, my mindset, the main thing would be the riskier things, or the things I'm more concerned about are the coins where I'm still in heavy profit. Okay, and I know some of you guys are like, oh, what do you mean? Everything's so low. Again, if the earlier you stacked, the less risky it was back then. Okay, so even at these current prices, depending on the coin, there are certain ones where you're still in pretty decent profit even at these prices, right? So like for me, for example, my two big ones were Sol and Caspa. Those are ones we were stacking at the end of 2022, in 2023, again, when everybody was saying all this stuff was dead and everything going on. So even at these prices, again, we're stacking during this time. Okay, so even at these prices, we're still in decent profit. Again, if you were buying this thing at $10, you're still looking pretty decent. Okay, so obviously it would have been better to fully take out over here, but again, I still do think it is going to have another peak at some point. Okay, so again, you have to have the mindset though that there's potential that we did peak. Okay, so this is where you have to weigh, or like in my case, I have to weigh, where do I think the price goes from here? Let's say we did peak, we start going down, how low can it potentially go? Anyone's guess, right? It's really hard to say. My personal guess, again, we're at $20 for the longest time. Will it go down that low? Maybe somewhere between $20-$30 I can definitely see. Will it go down to like the $10 range where it was happening with the FTX collapse? I personally don't think so, right? So anything is possible. I don't think it'll go that low, because one thing to factor in is if we did peak, if this was it, if this was over, typically we get those like 94% drops because we had those freaking crazy run-ups, right? The fact that we didn't have that crazy run-up, to me, also kind of signals, if this is over with, that we probably won't have that significant drop, or we're down like 90 to 95% on alts. Okay, so anything can happen. Again, I'm personally in the mindset that we are still going to run. So am I doing anything? No. Is it probably smart to de-risk? I've kind of already done that, right? So like during these peaks where we're at like 220, 240, I don't think I sold any at any of the high peaks where like 250, 260, whatever. Most of the time when I converted, it was like in the 220 range. That's how I built some of my other bags, right? With coins at the time when Sol was pumping, and let's say the others were in the inverse, or they were staying flat, or they're really low market caps, which again, I'm really into a lot of the deep in coins. That's where I've been deleveraging in a sense, right? So that's how I added a little bit more helium, a little bit more Hive Mapper Honey token, more geode, things of that sort, right? So am I looking to really deleverage here? No, because I've already kind of profit taken by going into those smaller coins, going that route. The other big coin for me would be Caspa. Okay, so again, this is another one that, oh man, it's only at a nickel. What do you mean? Again, it's one that we're stacking back here. You can watch the old first few videos I did when we were talking about it, right? Back when we were stacking in this range when it was like 0.002. Again, even at this price at a nickel, we're in pretty heavy profit. But you kind of have to ask yourself the same question: how much lower can it go from here? And this is one where it is tricky because it is extremely speculative, right? So like Solana, I have more confidence in like holding up better overall. It's a much bigger market cap. It is one of the leaders, right, in terms of actual use, revenue, all the metrics. It is actually the leader, right? It actually does bring in more daily revenue, more transactions per day than even like Ethereum currently. Okay, so for me, the fact that there's DATs going here, like there's a lot of reason for Solana to kind of hold up better than a lot of the others. You don't necessarily have that with CAS. Okay, so this is an extreme bet, right? It is high up there. It is number 49. I wouldn't be surprised to see it go down pretty significantly, right? Or maybe it only goes down a little bit. It's really hard to say, right? It is extremely, extremely hard. It's extremely, extremely difficult. But for me, at the end of the day, like, this portfolio is a very degen portfolio, right? This just for context, for you guys who aren't familiar, this portfolio is completely separate from the long-term, like, Bitcoin portfolio, okay? For me to sell at these prices, I'd rather just hold for another cycle at this point, right? It's a portfolio that can all go to zero. It's not going to affect me. I would much rather roll the dice essentially, okay, than sell a lot of these lows, right? Because you have to factor in the logic behind it. Does it make sense to sell at lows from like over a few years ago? Not really, especially if you are in the mindset that we are eventually going to run. Okay, so if you're not in that mindset, like if you think it is over, then you may want to de-risk. You may want to sell. I wouldn't dump all of it. Like, it's up to you though, right? It's really, really up to you. But for me to sell my Caspa at a nickel, no. I'd rather just hang on to it for another cycle, which again, isn't something ideal, but I'm very convinced that at some point alts will run, right? Whether it's early next year, mid next year, even late next year, that's going to be the case. So for me, that's kind of the mindset with it, right? So there's no wrong or right way, especially if you're heavy in profit, right? So we're highlighting these two coins because we are in pretty heavy profit still, even at these prices with both of those. Now, where it's a clear, easy decision is with a lot of the other alts that just are pretty much still cycle bear market lows, right? In some cases, they were all-time lows, right? I'm not going to be selling at all-time lows or this bear market cycle low, right? Because realistically, since it didn't pump, I don't see a lot of these going down the 80-90% from here, right? Realistically, they're probably just going to sit here. They can go down another 20-30%, another 40%, sure, maybe another even 50%. But a lot of them are so low that I'm just going to stack more, right? Like some of them, it just doesn't make sense. Again, some of them have ran, like we saw the whole thing with Zcash. BNB also had a good run. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the peak. Some of them haven't, right? Like if you look at a lot of these, it's very hard to convince me or anybody just looking at the numbers that this was the cycle top. Like this is how we're going to end this cycle with the majority of even these major alts, right? Like for me, it doesn't make logical sense, right? Emotionally, it feels like it, right? Like if you're running with emotion, it's like, yeah, we definitely peaked at December 24. That was it. But looking at everything going on, looking at the context of everything, taking out the emotions, just looking at everything, it just does not make sense that this is how it would end. It very well could though, right? But it's just, again, risk to reward. And a lot of these look pretty similar, right? If you look at AVEX, for example, I mean, does this look like a bear market chart? This is the yearly, by the way. I mean, look at how much it's on a downtrend, right? If anything, there's more of an argument to say that the bear market potentially started, or an altcoin bear market started at the end of this rally in December 2024, right? A lot of these coins have been on a significant downtrend ever since then, right? And then essentially being in a bear market for about a year. Okay, what is the bear market typically? Something to factor in, right? And that's with a lot of these. Okay, look at near another one, a lot of the majors. The reason we're highlighting this is a great example of one that I even added more just because just a few weeks ago it hit an all-time low, right? Not just a cycle low or a yearly low. It hit freaking 0.007 and a few cents, right? I think this was the official low, 7244. I think I bought it like 7475. Okay, so it did do this little pump thing, which it's done, and it's actually held up pretty well. So because it did pump so hard, I did sell pretty much all of it like at 10.5. Kind of still waiting to buy back in. Want to wait until it gets a little bit lower. We'll see, right? Initially, it wasn't looking too great. It didn't look like it was going to dip below because it held up pretty well. But again, this is another one. When you see prices like essentially all-time lows, I'm not going to be selling and just holding it at these price levels, right? It just makes more sense to hold it and see it through. Just continue to add to that bag if it's one that you think will do long term. I mean, I'm highlighting these coins, but it's whatever coins you're into, right? These are the kinds of things you want to look at. Like for me, that makes it an easy choice as to what to do with it. I'm not going to sell a coin that I think will do well at an all-time low, not just a yearly low, cycle low, an all-time low, right? It just doesn't make sense. And a lot of these are pretty damn close to even like cycle lows, right? So even like helium, for example, it was at $1 at one point. Sometime throughout this time, it was close to the dollar range, $1.19, $1.50, $1.37. So in that range, so it being at $1.85, again, it's so close to the bottom that, again, it's another one I would not consider at all dumping here, anywhere near here. I'd rather just hold for however long it takes, right? Again, if it's coins you believe in. Again, I'm just highlighting these coins. It doesn't mean that these are going to do well. It's just these are coins that I personally follow, I'm personally into. Kind of the same story with ALF, right? I'm not going to be selling at basically all-time lows, right? So it's not exactly there. It was a nickel back January 2023. But if we look for the majority of 2023, it's lower than what it was during most of those times, right? So obviously it would have made more sense to sell anytime up here. Do I think it's going to rebound up to here? It makes it a hard... Anything's possible, right? But again, the lower it goes, I don't need it to go as high to make the type of return that we were initially hoping for anyway, right? Did I think it was going to go down to freaking 12 cents? Hell no, but here we are, right? And it's one of those things where we just double down, right? So it's all going to be up to you. But again, you really got to prepare for the worst. What do you think is going to happen here? So again, the one recommendation I'll say is go into high conviction plays, right? You really need to be only in things you have high confidence in, because again, there is a chance this thing's over. But again, even if you're in a risky coin that you think can still potentially do well, if it's near all-time lows or if it's not too far away, for me at least, it doesn't make any sense to sell at that point, right? Unless it's a coin that looking at it, it doesn't look good anymore. I'm not bullish on it. I was just into it for the degen factor, then sure, it could make sense to capitulate and put it into something you do have more confidence in. Okay, so it's all about balance, right? You can have the majority into the more high confidence ones and then a certain percentage there. Maybe it's not a bad idea to kind of rebalance the portfolio a bit. Maybe if you are extremely heavy on something that ain't doing too well, or you're not too confident in, then it's not a bad time to rebalance just because everything else is down so significantly. Okay, but as far as just taking any like extreme measures, like, I'm going to sell it all, it's up to you, right? Some people have been doing that. They've been selling all their alts and just going right into BTC or going into cash. But for me, again, I'm personally just in the opinion that sometime 26 we're going to do well. And also, just even on a mental note, I would not be able to mentally survive that fact. If I were to sell everything, let's say, oh man, you know what, I'm done. I'm over everything, and for me to dump everything and go into cash only to see sometime next year for the bull market to actually happen for the alts. Like after like 3-4 years of work of doing through all this and then it happening right at the end, mentally, no. For me, I gotta stay in, right? Because I would not be able to mentally recover from that, right? That's definitely something you have to kind of factor in there too. Like I would be so pissed, beyond pissed if I were to do that, right? And at this point, again, the amount I have in this portfolio isn't going to do anything for me, right? But if what I hope happens, what even if it's only a 20% chance happens, potentially that can be worthwhile, right? So it's a risk to reward thing. For me, it's just still going to make sense to risk it for the biscuit, right? But again, you got to face the reality that currently it is pretty freaking risky. I'm not super confident either way. Again, I really wouldn't be surprised in either outcome. But again, the way I have my portfolio set up, I'm kind of ready for either outcome. And I think that's the bigger takeaway here, that I'm prepared in case things do take off. And guess what? If this is it, if this is over, a lot of the coins, they're so low, I'm good with where they're at. I'm just going to continue to accrue for whenever the next pump is, right? Whether it follows this liquidity cycle, whether it follows it, whether it doesn't, whether Bitcoin turns into this more reserve asset and maybe we don't, and maybe the alts don't follow it. Who freaking knows at this point? I think that's kind of the bigger takeaways at the end of the day. Nobody freaking knows. The 4-year cycle is over. I can pretty confidently say that that is done, right? Is it going to follow the liquidity cycle? Maybe, maybe not. Is it still going to be cyclical though? Yes, just like the markets are, right? But to what extent? It's going to be really hard to say, right? But for people following the 4-year cycle like a Bible, I think those days are done, right? So just understand your portfolio, make sure you're fully kind of ready for either scenario, right? I think that's the biggest thing. Let me know in the comments, guys, where are you guys at? Like, what percentage do you have it at that you think this market is over, right? Are you 90%? Are you like 50%? Are you kind of just a coin flip? Let me know in the comments, guys. Please comment, like, and subscribe, guys. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'm out.